So, hello everybody. I'm Dorte from Pila Pharma, and today I have invited a guest, another one of my smart people in my surrounding. Richard Busellato was elected board member in May, and we chose him to be part of the board because of his vast insight into financial markets, which is of course very important. When you develop a drug, it's about having a good idea, but it's also to get the funds needed and understanding how to move in the financial markets. So Richard, thanks for joining. And could you maybe tell us a little about your background and what brought you to Pila?
Thank you, Dorte, for those very kind words. And I'd like to thank all the shareholders of Pila for their confidence in me and electing me to the board. Like Dorte said, I've worked pretty much only in the financial markets. I'm a naturally born Swedish speaker, which we both felt was important given that we are listed in Stockholm, in Sweden. I grew up in Stockholm, but via Brussels, I ended up in London about 27 years ago, and I've been working there ever since. I have spent my whole career pretty much managing capital in various institutions, big banks, hedge funds, and even for a Swedish treasury called Stora. So my background is very much in the financial space and not in the pharmaceutical space, but hopefully I bring something a little bit different to the board of Pila. And that was no doubt Dorte and the shareholders' intention when I got nominated.
Yes, I think definitely you bring a lot of common sense and knowledge about the financial markets to the team and the company. And thank you for that, for volunteering in being part of our group. We are now talking a lot about obesity, since that was my initial idea when I worked at Novo 20 years back and got this idea to treat diabetes, but actually treat obesity and obesity-related diseases and disorders, including diabetes. So that was my original idea, to treat obesity, but back then obesity wasn't a disease, like registered disease. So developing a drug for a non-disease, that was not possible. So we focused on diabetes first. But things have changed. Obesity is now, since the last 10 years, becoming a registered disease in many countries, including the US. And therefore, companies have developed now in that last decade products that were already diabetes treatments, but have shown an effect on weight management. And they have now registered some drugs there. Forerunners are Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly. And what I have seen in the scientific community is an explosion in the recognition of the results these products can achieve in body weight reduction and reduction of risk of many things, but most of all, and most important of all, of course, cardiovascular risk, meaning if you reduce body weight, you can live longer. And that's what we all want, right? So, but from your perspective, I mean, I'm following the scientific community and have done that for 20 years. So I see an enormous shift in the trend in this space. How do you see it from your perspective? From the financial perspective, as an investor, what do you see in that, in your feed of information?
Pretty similar to your views. If I rewind back, and I didn't start as an equity investor, I started as a fixed income investor, but I've been managing equity portfolios for about 25 years. And pharma has always been one of the biggest sectors in the market. Always perceived as quite defensive sector, despite displaying a lot of volatility around the drugs they develop. And the focus has very much shifted compared to when I started in the 90s. The focus was probably a lot more on oncology products, but battling various forms of cancers. You had some multi-selling drugs back in those days, including AstraZeneca's Losec, which became Nexium and was fighting ulcers, to via, I think, various other diseases or conditions like hypertension. You are now very firmly with a, I would say, almost total focus in the space on various weight-related issues. Obesity, we know, covariates with so many medical conditions. So it's almost like you go into the root of the problem. And the companies that have managed to develop products that seem like they will have good results in fighting obesity has been hugely rewarded by the market. And here I'm thinking predominantly of Eli Lilly and Novo Nordisk, who are the leaders around the GLP drugs that they have.
They're the front runners, so to speak.
Yeah,
they have made
absolutely.
the prototype, the rocket science development to break through that sound wall. Basically, I think it's
absolutely.
That's how I see it. It's been like so many have tried for so long without success, and now it's there. So
exactly.
what do you think about the, is it a trend that this market will shift towards weight management as a preventive treatment of all the comorbidities? And how big a market is it? And what do you expect of that? I mean, how do you see it as an investor?
It's, I think, in my mind, no doubt the biggest potential market you have in the space, because, like you said, if you fight excess weight, you actually tackle so many other diseases that follow on. So you're almost like you're moving into the preventive space and saying, if we can tackle excess weight and obesity, we know we will have very good results on a lot of other diseases, obviously including diabetes, which is very, very closely linked to people with too much body weight. So the focus is absolutely enormous. The future priced into companies like Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly is very rosy because of the results they have achieved so far. On the other hand, the cautious side of me would say that for us to tackle a market which I think is forecasted to be like 1.3 billion people in a couple of years, it's obviously an enormous market.
I heard figures that half of the world's population will become obese. Actually, here in Sweden, it's in Denmark, it's more than half of the adult population above 45 years are overweight. So if you want, I mean, normally you have not treated that except for asking people to jump on a bike if they like, but it's not really been recognized.
No, it hasn't.
It is something that you should monitor and reduce. Otherwise, you will most likely become sick and have a lousy life and be a health burden.
You will become a very big economic burden.
Exactly, and I think that's so. I think, as I see it, all countries, regulators, people with certain conditions in this space are recognizing that this could be a smart way to do it, to reduce suffering and expenses in the long run. But if there are like so many people who need or would like a treatment, we know that the bigger companies, Novo and Eli Lilly, that have fantastic products. I was involved in Novo's development, and I really love that product. But they are struggling to produce enough for the market demand. I think they will solve that because they are really good at producing stuff and getting it out in the market. But what about cost and things like that? How do you see that?
These are very, very important issues, and I think you have for me, there are two things to focus on here. Everyone agrees the market is absolutely massive, which commercially makes it super interesting. At the same time, on a health perspective, this is something predominantly the developed world needs to tackle because it's effectively pandemic, that people are carrying too much weight, and we know it leads to further diseases. So tackling it preventively will be paramount to lower the economic bill of these countries. That's where the cost angle comes in. There is no doubt that the preliminary results on these products that have been recently developed are absolutely phenomenal. But the suggested prices that have been touted so far, and by the way, these companies' valuation is probably based a fair bit on them actually being able to charge the prices that has been mentioned in certainly in the financial press, but I'm sure also in the medical press. That is all of a sudden excluding the vast majority of the world's population from accessing them. Because even in the rich world, publicly funded healthcare systems will have no ability to absorb those kind of costs, because it will simply not be permitted by the budgetary constraints of these countries. So the mass market solution cannot come in the form of these super expensive, highly effective drugs. It needs to be something else to reach much further penetration. And if you look in the less developed world, where obviously money is even more an issue, these drugs simply have no place. So if we're going to tackle weight, obesity, diabetes, all these conditions, then we need something that is much, much cheaper. And on the consumer side, we know from decades of experience that people's preference for taking medicine is in the simplest tablet form. Small tablets, easy to take. Once you move over to liquid, there is more resistance because it's a little bit messier to take on board. And if you start looking at things like injecting them, there is a huge resistance because a lot of people freak out at the sight of a needle, you know. So my mom would probably pass out. and that does limit your ability to actually deliver those drugs. So the tablet form is by far the simplest, possibly
I have actually
rivaled by inhalator.
Yeah, actually, I was two things here. I've actually heard that Novo Nordisk's solution on injection once per week with a very, very little needle is actually not a big obstacle. It's maybe more the price, and then that you have to put it in the fridge. But I think it's such a relatively low burden. So just for that product, I think, but of course, I mean, tablets are probably easier and at least they're cheaper to make. Yeah. And the other thing I forgot, but let's just come over into, okay, there are two things I want you to maybe comment on. Now you're part of the board and we discuss various things and positioning and, you know, way forward. And we have decided to make an effort in highlighting that we believe we can be an effective and maybe cost-effective solution for weight management going forward. And that, of course, still has to be proven. We have to do a next study where we look at the 3 months dosing and then higher doses. So hopefully we can see. I know from my previous time when I still was at Novo Nordisk, I screened a lot of various compounds in animal models. And it for sure looked like there is, a potential to regulate body weight in rodents. We still have to see it in humans. But there are two things. First of all, as an investor, what attracts you? And I know I'm fishing for that you have said something about, the size of the market, that it should be something that there is a genuine need for, nothing that is created by, trends or things, but it's actually a need. And the other thing is, how do you see our small tablet solution in this obesity? Maybe not race. There is a race right now, but the market will be so big and there will be need for, I think, various solutions if you really want to stop this obesity pandemic, or at least the effects of it. So You can start with either how you think Pila could fit into this, according to what I informed the board about the potential features. And then, of course, what is it for you as an investor that could make Pila an interesting investment case?
Yeah, I tend to be a quite simple person when I invest. I use models that have worked for me for decades. Actually, I'm displaying a little bit of my age here, but the 2020s is actually the 5th decade I'm involved in financial markets on a professional basis. And for me, when I look to invest, and this goes for all industries, by the way, it's not in any way solely the pharmaceutical market. I look at consumer goods, I look at industrials, I look at telecoms, etc. I tend to focus on companies which are in the business of delivering genuinely needed goods and services. Once you are in that business, you know the parameters because there will be demand for them, almost irrespective of what happens to economic development. There is a certain underlying base need. And that means in financial terms, you can truncate a lot of the really bad outcomes for your product. It means that as an investor, I will miss out on a few explosive opportunities with completely new products because perhaps I couldn't see the real potential. And I never invested in Facebook because I couldn't really see the potential. But I also avoided investing in Peloton because I couldn't see the potential. So when I look at the pharmaceutical companies, I tend to almost solely focus on those that are in the process of developing genuinely needed products. And at the moment, diabetes/obesity, weight loss, whatever we want to call that particular bucket, is very much top of the agenda because it's the biggest market and it's going to lead to, I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say we're going to have catastrophic economic consequences for our welfare systems if we cannot tackle this. And these are systems that are taking already now a bigger and bigger proportion of government spending. So actually capping that spending will be imperative for whomever is in power, no matter if you're left or right or center. You will have to tackle your healthcare spending going forward. So delivering those drugs fit totally into my paradigm. And then
delivering, and that drug could be Pila's, or how do you see that?
Absolutely. It could be Pila's, and Pila on a specific company basis fits into my matrix by saying, we know the GLPs are fantastic, but you have cost issues. You might have delivery issues. And something you mentioned, which I had never really focused on until very recently, is that you have problems in large parts of the world with storage when you need to chill drugs. Because we can see, and I'm living in the UK, and we have disruption to our actual electrical grid on a not weekly, but monthly basis because of adverse weather effects happening. So if you have expensive drugs sitting and you're relying on cooling them, you actually have a problem, even in countries where you don't think you might have a problem, let alone when you're going to take them in areas which are much warmer naturally and transport them and store them. So that means you are actually in the space which I love to invest in, because it's going to be needed on both a vertical and horizontal basis, so to speak.
And it has a solution that is not available at the moment, I think.
No, not at the moment. And I think my view, and obviously from our board work, you know where I fit into our matrix, is that delivering a price competitive, easily accessible compound for the biggest medical market in the world is as close to a no-brainer as I can see.
Okay, so Richard, I think that is actually an excellent way to conclude our discussion. We, of course, hope anybody who watches this will follow us and invest. We have an ongoing rights issue for another week. until Monday the 4th. And for anybody who wants to invest, it would be fueled into new clinical studies, two actually, but one focusing on exploring higher doses, longer treatment in obese people with diabetes. And we hope that there might be a trend readout on both the efficacy on glucose reduction as well as body weight that should lead into longer studies, hopefully with a partner. I think with a trend on obesity reduction, we could be in a good position to have a partnership for going to the market in this worldwide pandemic. We need somebody who can sell tablets around the globe to help us realize our vision to help people live a healthy and longer life. So thanks for joining me, Richard, and thanks for sharing your knowledge and being part of Pila and making our understanding of financials become so much more profound than before. So thanks.
My pleasure, Dorte. Thank you so much for having me here.
So.